possible breakthrough that could have been or seems to be on the horizon when it comes to the India-US trade pact. There's a critical push for economic diplomacy. India's Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal is in fact in Washington to fast-track the first phase of a long-anticipated trade pact with America. A breakthrough could be on the horizon. Which way would it go is something that remains to be seen. Which are those sectors where it will be most visible remains to be seen. Because at the end of the day, what we are looking at is a three-phase sort of a pact. In one first phase, it could be a very small, specific sectors that could be agreed upon. Vast sectors may be in the second phase, about 19 or 20 of them. And then it could be the third and the full-fledged trade pact that could be in place no sooner than maybe next year. But some thorny issues remain. Primary of that, of course, is the non-tariff barriers that Indian goods are subjected to when they go to America. What are these non-tariff barriers? Essentially, quality checks. Any good can be stopped by any country the moment you say it doesn't meet a quality check, doesn't it? And that is the big non-tariff barrier that most Indian goods are subjected to when they are in America. How do we get past that? Will those issues be addressed? Will that mean that India-US relationship will probably go to the next level after this trade pact is signed? Are some of the questions that we're going to try and put forth, and let's put that out, some of those big questions before we get in our guests to decode some of that. Pratik and Ajay Bagga will join us, but first I want to put out those big questions in terms of what all are we looking to really get past as far as the trade pact is concerned. Will agriculture be a part of the phase deal? Remember, that's the most important aspect, because agriculture at the end of the day is one of the key issues on which India wants protection for. The next question, which is, in Trump 2.0, are tariffs essentially driving diplomacy? Is everything being seen through the prism of tariffs? Third, will early wins essentially lead to long-term trust? Remember, there are cases that have been filed. India has actually filed case in the WTO, which brings me to the last question. What happens to those cases, the retaliatory tariffs that have been imposed by India? Will all of them be put aside? Will those trust issues, those dispute issues also be resolved is the other key question that we are hoping, hopefully, to get answers to. Pratik, Dattani and Ajay Bagga joins me to decode this. Pratik joins us from London. He is the MD of EPG, Economic and Strategic Consulting, and Ajay Bagga is a veteran market expert. In fact, Pratik, let me start with you. It's a three-phased trade deal that's been in the works for some time. In fact, J.D. Vance announced the terms of reference when he was in India last month. It's been about a month since he announced that. And enough back and forth has gone. How hopeful are you that a pact would be announced in its entirety? And the second part I want to ask you is, how limited do you expect the first phase to be? Because I suspect these negotiations will probably go on for some time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Gaurie. I think the first thing to remember is it's actually really unusual for the US side to admit to the fact that this will be a protracted set of trade negotiations, that it will be over three phases. The last phase will need congressional approval in more than a year's time in the US. And if there are some very competitive House races, particularly on the Republican side, then maybe that won't even get signed off in the House of Representatives. So this is very much a long-term thing. Trump announced his tariff pause on the 9th of April until the 31st of July. He's said 150 countries have got in touch with him to negotiate trade deals. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has said actually they're only focusing on the 18 most important trading partners. India is the 10th most important for the US. So I think there's a will on both sides. Piyush Goyal is a seasoned hand at these kind of trade negotiations. He's just finished negotiating a trade deal with the UK after 3 years of intense negotiations. I dare say that the Indian side is more experienced in this than the current US administration is, because most of the US guys have come in from the private sector rather than having a big background in government. I would expect whatever we announce now to be very limited in scope. Things like phytosanitary standards, you can't announce quickly. These are very detailed regulatory changes that require agreement across an entire supply chain. So I think those will come much later. I think the benefit for the Indian economy is probably going to be quite limited. The absence of a deal will hurt India for sure. The presence of it, I don't think, will benefit India much, at least in whatever we expect in the first round.
Ajay, I want to ask you this question as well, which is that the market, of course, and a lot of investors have been waiting for some sort of a big breakthrough sort of an announcement. The sense one gets is we are still some time away from that big bang announcement, probably a roadmap at best. But I want to understand from you, where do you think this give and take will lie? Because India also has its concerns, whether it's the agriculture, the larger dairy market, and so on and so forth. Where do you see this give and take actually lie? And how limited do you think the first phase of these negotiations could be?
Yeah, Gaurie, it could be, as Pratik mentioned also, I think it could be a very limited first phase where zero tariff kind of goods are both ways. There is a handshake on those, and there is some reduction by India on some key areas that the US wants. Farm, I think, is a no-go area because of domestic political compulsion. So even Japan doesn't open its farm sector. So those farm exports which are already coming in, like the nuts from California, all those things will continue. But overall, a broad brush, opening it to US wheat or US soya or US corn, that won't happen. So I think it will be a limited deal. Again, there will be a lot of talk of mutual bonhomie and strategic relationships, but we'll have to cut through and see. 10% minimum, I think that Trump has made very clear that there are 10% universal tariffs. So we are not going back to the 2-3% days. 10% will be the minimum. And then product by product. What India will be trying, especially the very labor intensive exports of ours, like textiles, like gems, jewelry, leather exports, electronics, how do those get
And you're
treated?
mentioning sectors, but I want to now, in fact, go up, talk 30,000 feet here, which is that there are also trust concerns on both sides. The fact that India took US to WTO, the fact that US imposed tariffs for steel and aluminium, that also means that while negotiations may be happening on one corner of this entire trade arrangement, the day-to-day discussions still revolve around protecting domestic industry, and that could be counterintuitive if you're really trying to have a broad trade pact, isn't it, Pratik?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, looking back several decades, the way the Japanese economy grew to what it is today is through protectionism. With the support from the US, the way the Korean economy grew is through protectionism. And India is at a different phase of economic development from the US. So it's all very well for Trump to say, remove all tariff barriers and non-tariff barriers. But that's because per capita income may be tens of thousands of dollars in the US and it's $2,500 in India. So India actually, for very sound economic reasons, needs some of those barriers in place. And you're right, there's these trust issues, but I think ultimately Trump is a deal maker and Piyush Goyal is extremely seasoned in this. I think if there's a deal to be had, these other WTO issues will fall by the wayside.
Final question I want to ask you is, which is that while trade discussions are important, protecting domestic industry is equally important. What is the kind of upside that we're looking at? Because we sort of get so bogged down by the give and take, we forget the upside. What's the upside that we're talking about here if this trade pact goes through sooner than we expect?
Sure. So the US is India's most valued trading partner, $40 billion plus in trade. So for India to be able to increase its exports is really, really important. The baseline for tariffs, as Ajay also said, is going to be 10%. So for export-oriented industries from India, where they're labor-intensive and margins are really low, that 10% will still make a big difference as to whether those companies still want to export to the US to the same extent. For final goods and intermediate goods where labor intensity is much lower and profit margins are much higher, that's where I think India stands to gain the most. And I think that's where India also wants to move towards as well. So agriculture is a no-go, absolutely, like Ajay said, but where there's more IP, there's more know-how, that's where India wants to move its economy as well.
Indeed. We leave it there. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me on India Global. And as We await the final announcement. Well, bottom line, viewers, is that tariff is a lever that Donald Trump uses all too often. But let's be clear, the trade deal is as much of interest to the US as it is for India, simply because India offers a large market. There are also geopolitical concerns and tensions, ensuring that all of American trading and business interests should not be locked into China, but they want alternate supply chains. India provides that. So as negotiations continue, there are also several unanswered questions. While the upside is there, but there are several unanswered questions. How will the two sides unwind the additional duties that they have slapped? Specific sectors which are very sensitive on the two sides. Steel and aluminium for the US, agriculture for India. How do those concerns get addressed? And for India, remember, the dispute to the WTO that has been escalated to the level of the WTO also needs to be wound down. Then there are instances when Donald Trump has made comments that don't add up. Comment around India's zero tariffs offer add to the frustration of trade negotiators on both sides. And last and most important question, will this actually lead to a more evolved US-India relationship? What will that be? The shape of that, the contours of that? Will that mean greater collaboration on technology front, space front, intelligence front, geopolitical alignment? All of that would probably be known once the trade issue is sorted out, and sooner rather than later.